Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. It's great to see you today. I hope your day is going well, and more importantly, I hope your business is going well. If not, and you're looking for some good advice to lift up your business today, you are in luck. We have an amazing, incredible guest on the podcast today. We got Bob Burg on the podcast. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's the author of The Go-Giver. It's one of the most popular books in the networking world. It comes around quite a bit in the sales conversation. I personally think it is an incredible book. And like I said, it's been recommended to me even before I checked it out. It had been recommended to me probably a dozen times. This book will flip on its head the whole sales conversation and really make sales more about what do you give rather than what you receive. I love this episode, and more importantly, I loved sitting down with Bob. You're going to enjoy this episode. Before we dive in, though, we got a word from one of the amazing sponsors for the podcast. Take a listen. We'll be right back soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all of this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutions.llc.com to find out more. Bob, it is so great to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you, Blake. Great to be with you.
You know, Bob, I got to be honest. Every now and then we have what I call a high-profile guest. I mean, all the guests are amazing, but you are someone who you've published an incredible book. I feel like it is shared everywhere. Like I mentioned to you before we hit record that it's been mentioned in my BNI meeting quite a bit. It's just great to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you. Well, love BNI. One, the founder, Dr. Meisner, is really one of my heroes. And BNI are, made up of people who do networking right. So it's an honor to know that they support the book.
So I know that many people who are in the entrepreneurial world, they've either read the book themselves or they've been handed a copy or it's been mentioned before. Give us a little bit of the origin story. How did the book come about? How did you put this thing together? I'd love to hear what led up to publishing the book.
Well, many years ago, and this is now, I guess, about 30 years ago, I had my first big book, which was called Endless Referrals, and the subtitle is Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. And it was really a how-to book for entrepreneurs and salespeople who, they knew they had a great product or service. They knew it brought lots of value to their customers and clients, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable or confident going into their local communities and building the kinds of relationships that would cause people to want to do business with them directly and or indirectly. So Endless Referrals was really a how-to guide. The basic premise was that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And so, it was a successful book, but it was a traditional how-to book. And I'd always, since I'd been in sales, I'd always, and this has, been about 40 years now, I'd always loved reading business parables because stories, I think, they connect on a deeper level, a heart-to-heart level, and there's something special about them. And I'd always thought, one day I'd like to take the basic premise and write a story with it. But I'm really not a storyteller. I mean, from stage I can, but as far as writing a book, I'm a how-to author. That's my strength zone. So in the I guess early 2000, maybe about 2000, 2, 3, 4, what have you. I'm not sure, but I got a chance to meet John David Mann, who was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I was writing a monthly column for. And John was a great editor, but he also had a fantastic reputation within his niche of being a terrific writer, storyteller. He'd been kind of the ghostwriter behind a couple of very big parables and so forth. He was just a great guy. And so I took this idea to him, this very, very basically sketched out, type of thing. It certainly wasn't even in story form, just some ideas. But I said I'd love him to be the lead writer and storyteller. And he was busy at the time, but because of the relationship we had, he considered it. So he and his back then fiance, now wife Anna, they were in Western Florida, Gulf Coast, visiting her mom. So they took about a 4-hour drive across state to visit me, and I live in Jupiter, Florida, which is right on the ocean side. So. Where was I going with this? Oh, so we had about a 3-hour dinner after their 4-hour ride, discussing what the book would be about. And he still wasn't totally, there. But a few weeks later, he called me and said, Anna and I have been discussing this. Yeah, I think this is a good idea. Let's do it. So we wrote the story. And again, I give John the credit for making this thing sing. He made that story happen. That was the easy part. It took us maybe 3 or 4 months, but then it took us a year to find a publisher. We got turned down, I think, 24 times by New York publishing houses before finally the 25th one said yes. And they've been a fantastic publishing partner.
I didn't know that detail. It's so funny to me. I love that detail too, because as many of the people listening to the podcast are business owners, they've become salespeople, right? Sure. Because when you become a business owner, you learn how you have to sell.
Oh, absolutely.
And social media doesn't always tell. They tell like the successful part, but not always the grind. But it sounds like you guys had to have been committed to this idea. 24 no's. What kept you going after the first one said no, that you weren't just like, all right, yeah, we're done. This isn't going to pan out.
Well, John and I both had been salespeople, in our lives, salespeople and entrepreneurs. So we know that no is just part of the game. But we also, we took the no's for what they were. Now, in some cases, it was just, no, we're not interested in doing a parable. Well, okay, that's more of a condition than an objection. If they're not interested in that, they're obviously, some were, we like the idea of a parable. We don't necessarily like that story. Well, so we'd find out why that was, and did they have a point and that we could live with and change it a bit and adapt here and adjust there. Maybe yes, maybe no. We tried to keep a very open mind about it, not let our egos get in the way. Some just said, yeah, we like doing parables, but the world doesn't need another parable right now. Well, again, that we're gonna kind of just say next in that case. And then some had some things where, yeah, we like the story, but we didn't feel it really had. Well, okay, now it made us think, well, we need to, right? Because the market's always going to tell you, what. Now, it doesn't mean a publisher is going to be right, but we needed to listen, just like any salesperson. You listen and you kind of put it through and you ask the others and your brain trust, and we're very lucky that we have great people around us. And
let me ask you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let me ask you a quick question there, because I think there's a great nuance there for our listeners. How do you, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, how do you know the difference between someone who tells you no? I think you said like it's the wrong condition, like, oh, we're just not looking for that kind of book,
right?
And legitimate feedback, because it feels like as we're selling things, we can easily mix the two up. Like someone gives you legitimate feedback, and you're like, oh, well, you weren't my customer anyway. When they were, but you missed the opportunity to see insight there. So how can our listeners, how do you get better at figuring that out?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's why listening is so important, and listening really to understand, as opposed to just kind of listen in order to then get your opinion back in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, and it's not always easy, but it's something that you've got to be able to do. I'm also a big believer in asking people around me whose opinions I trust, and that aren't necessarily going to just tell me what I want to hear.
Right.
But they're people who have experience that I know I can learn from. And even then, you're still going to go through everything and you're going to decide, does this make sense? How does it make sense? Where does it make sense? Why might they be thinking that? So you're always going to be checking premises. But, from the time that we handed in that first copy, and our agent took that copy to that first one who said no, to the last one, we did make some changes. We didn't change the story around a whole lot, but there were some changes we made that needed to be made. But one big thing was we needed to really kind of up the marketing we'd be doing and how we'd be positioning ourselves and positioning the book. And so, we invested time, money, and so forth, energy into doing that. So it turned out that, some of the suggestions are really good suggestions. Others were kind of meaningless. But they all have have a point. It's funny. A good friend of mine, actually, she and her husband, Andrea Waltz and Richard Fenton, wrote a parable that came out about the same time ours did, maybe a year or so later. I'm not sure, but it's called "Go for No." And it's about a copying machine salesperson who learns how to kind of utilize the word "no" as inspiration as opposed to discouragement. And so the subtitle is "Yes is the destination, no is how you get there." Right. So there's a whole parable just about how to really be able to deal with the word no, because it can be discouraging. And I don't want to in any way, come across to your viewers and your listeners as though I'm saying we didn't care about the no's and it was like, who cares? No, we were discouraged at times.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of, despite, because I don't think anybody likes to be told no. Who does, right? Now there's the old sales thing. Well, they're not saying no to you. They're saying no to the opportunity. Well, that's true, but it still stinks.
Yeah.
Right.
It feels like
we don't want to sugarcoat that.
Bob, it feels like also when you're young in your business, like your business is you're putting so much blood, sweat, and tears into this. And for some of the listeners, maybe even they quit their full-time job, to go all in on this. And so there's an interesting thing there on, excuse me, leaning into the no to gain insight versus the business owner where like the no is so hurtful, like you avoid the no. Right. So I think you're making a great insight there. And I know you said it was discouraging, but you also mentioned like y'all's ego wasn't on the line. I think that right there is a challenge for business owners is how do I separate my idea from the feedback I'm getting?
Yeah. So I think there's an answer to it, which it took me many years to discover from when I was younger, and I was really ego driven and ego led. Okay. And I think it's having as your highest value, the seeking of truth. And you know what I'm saying? So in other words, if you notice, and if you read books about very sustainably successful people, immensely sustainable companies, you find that truth is a very big value, very high value. They're much more interested in knowing the truth about something than they are in just feeling good. Right. And so, you have companies like the Bridgewater Fund, Ray Dalio, where, he wrote in his book Principles that it was required of people in the company. And it was from the lowest on the totem pole all the way up to Dalio himself, that no matter, if someone saw that something was counterproductive to the way things were happening in the business, they called each other out. Now they did it politely, and it should be done politely and tactfully and so forth, of course, respectfully, but the truth was the highest ideal, right? And so that's how they made sure they were always advancing. They weren't getting caught in their own egos. And so I think once I started seeing that as I got a little older and more mature and started seeing that as that's when things turned around.
There's hope for me then. I just need to get a little bit more seasoned. Like
you're very young. I don't know how old you are, but I can tell you're way ahead at your age than I was when I was your age. So
Well, so in hindsight, so the Go Giver, over 1 million copies sold, is translated into 30 different languages. It is, and I don't know like what all industries you've seen the book proliferate into, but I know for me, it has been in that like referral sales world. Um, in hindsight, like, did you know it was lightning in a bottle? Or like, is it weird looking back and being like, wow, this thing, not to sell yourself short, but like this thing really took off. People really like this book. Like, what's it like now years later, looking back and being like, holy cow, this thing it's a household business book.
Well, we were confident that there was a market for it because we felt that people wanted to know that they could do business in a way that they could feel good about themselves while also greatly profiting.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt it was a message that's time had come, even though we also didn't think it was particularly original, because, you read any good business book or any good sales book, it's always about focusing on providing great value to others and being willing to receive abundance. That's really all we did is take those principles and put them into a story. But we felt that it was going to be well embraced. I don't think anyone ever knows that it's going to hit that big when it does.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? We can say, oh yeah, I knew, I don't think we ever really know. So I'd say we suspected it was going to be successful. I'm not sure if we expected it was going to hit as it did.
Yeah, you strike me as someone who's
but it feels great that it did.
Yeah.
Very glad.
But you strike me as someone who's pretty humble, though, in the sense of like you have every reason, right? To like, I've published this book. I'm, this international keynote speaker. I mean, you're doing all these incredible things. How do you, I guess, stay hungry for, I guess, what's next, or, new entrepreneurial ideas, new books that pop into your head? Like, what does that process look like for you?
Well, again, it's easy to stay humble when you've made as many mistakes as I have. And that's what people don't see. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that with most people, who've accomplished some things, there's been many more defeats, many more failures. In fact, I'm not really sure how, maybe some people just have that, natural thing and things just fall into place. But the laws of life don't tend to work that way. You learn by making mistakes. Now, I'd always rather learn through other people's mistakes, right? Say OPM, other people's money. How about OPM, other people's mistakes, or OPW, other people's wisdom? And that's something I didn't start to learn till I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I thought I had to, fail at everything, learn it myself, and be well. You shouldn't have to quite do that. There's a lot of other people's experience we can learn from. And so I think that's what kind of motivates me to spread that message. So when you say, well, how do you really keep hungry or staying? It's because you feel like there's a lot more work to be done. Mm-hmm. And, you kind of feel, and I think it's an aspect of human nature that we want to feel like we're making a difference, like we're part of something bigger than just ourselves. Yeah. So it's really for selfish reasons. Mm-hmm. I feel good about myself when I feel like I'm being productive and bringing value.
When I think about like just the impact you're making, and then also, you made the comment like there's nothing really that new, I guess. I mean, the book's incredible, obviously, but I say this a lot on the podcast when people are like, "Hey, it's a great podcast." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I mean, I don't really say anything that's like that insightful in the sense of it's a new concept." But it does feel like there is this kind of constant battle for newer entrepreneurs as they try to sort of like discover their identity of like how new does my service or product need to be? If I'm not the only one offering this, am I doing the wrong thing? How do I differentiate myself? You published a business book that, and it wasn't your first one. There are thousands of business books. Do you have any advice or encouragement for sort of the budding entrepreneur who's like really thinking about, okay, what does it look like to leave my mark in a meaningful way?
Well, first, and you brought up a good point as you were talking about that, about differentiation. And I think that's what it comes down to. That doesn't mean the product or service has to be new. There's very few new things. I mean, every so often somebody's going to invent something, and that's great. All the power to them, and so forth. But there's not a whole lot of new stuff. I think there's ways to apply things maybe that are that are new. But I think the biggest thing is it's how you differentiate yourself in the marketplace in your marketplace amongst those who are selling basically the same thing as you are. So let's say you have someone who opens up an accounting business, okay, and they're doing people's taxes. And well, I mean, there's nothing new about the value they're going to bring. Intrinsically, they're going to help people save money on their taxes. They're going to save their clients time, by doing it instead of a client doing it. And they're going to provide their client with the peace of mind and security of knowing it was done correctly. Okay, there's nothing new about that. That's what an accountant does. And so, but if you did nothing more than that, you'd be in trouble, because all your competing, accountants can say that they can do the same thing. So if your prospective customer or client cannot see any difference between you and any of your competitors, well, it's always going to come down to who has the lowest fee or price. That's a race to the bottom. And when you sell on low price, you're basically a commodity. You're interchangeable. You're right. When you sell on high value, you're a resource. So how do you distinguish yourself in the marketplace? How do you build such a reputation that you become that accountant of choice, even that one who is charging higher fees than your competitors? And, so the short answer is you become that additional value, right? You become that point of differentiation. Now, how do you do that? Well, the good news is there are dozens, if not hundreds of ways to communicate that additional value, but they tend to come down to 5 what we call elements of value. And those elements of value are excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, and appreciation. And to the degree that you can communicate one or more, hopefully all 5 of those at every single touch point. So from the minute you meet that person, whether it's an inbound call, someone responding to something an article that you put online, or an outbound call, or you meet somebody at your at a local event, or whatever it happens to be, from the moment you meet that person through the follow-up and follow-through process, the relationship building process, the sales process, the referral process, to the degree that you communicate that excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, and appreciation, that's the degree that you take both low price or low fee and your competition out of the picture. You have distinguished yourself in the marketplace. Doesn't mean the product or service is different, but you've brought a whole different level of experience to it for your marketplace.
We talk a lot about this on the podcast in terms of like building your tribe of raving fans. And I love how you make the differentiation conversation about you as the owner, like what you're bringing to the table and the way you're doing business. Because I know sometimes people, they miss the personal element of this. And so when they're talking about like the accounting company, like, well, how are we going to be different? They go to things that they think is different, but doesn't really matter to the customer. For example, like, we're going to do all your accounting books on hot pink paper. Like, it's different, but right. It's not meaningful.
That's a great point. That you bring up a great point. A colleague of mine, his name is Scott McCain. He wrote a book called Create Distinction. And he said, there's a big difference between being different and being and distinguishing yourself. Anybody can be different. You can stand on a street corner and go, bah! That's different.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to bring in a lot of business doing that. So I love what you say. Yeah. It's not the pink paper that does it. It's the, so I'll give you, just a thought. There's a woman in Michigan who tells a story, and she happens to be an accountant. And so when a new client walks into her office, I mean, this is just one thing. It could be anything. And it's amazing how this can be utilized. The basic principle can be utilized in many businesses. But when a new client would come in, they had this big whiteboard in the waiting area, the reception area. And one of her team members was an artist, and so they would draw a thing that welcome to new she'd do it in the fancy calligraphy, welcome to new clients, Dave and Betty Jones, and she'd draw flowers, and then they actually had fresh flowers all around it, welcome to, right, and made a big thing of these new clients. Now, what does that have to do with accounting? Well, nothing. Okay, but it had everything to do with these people feeling amazingly welcome when they came in. Now, what do you think they're telling everybody, all their friends, the next time they see them? You're right about how their accountant made them feel so welcome by, whatever. So again, those are just, that's not everything, but that's one thing. That is a way that just distinguishes you.
I feel like the businesses that it almost feels like when people talk about customer service, like it's become such like an overused term, kind of like authenticity on social media. Someone's like, oh, I'm very authentic. But in the same way, I know so many businesses, because I ask this question to people who I work with, who come on the podcast. I say, hey, what makes your business different? And honestly, the most common answer I get is customer service. But what's interesting is I don't know if many people are thinking about it in the way you're talking about it, which is, I think, of like a level higher. Like we're talking customer experience. Like what's the experience like? And I think instead we're thinking of like, oh, well, I was polite to that customer.
Exactly.
Even though I didn't cuss them out, like I didn't lose my temper. And it's like, that's like, I gave great customer service instead of really thinking about that higher level thing, which is really what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's just another story about distinguishing oneself. This is during the this was after the Go-Giver, soon after the Go-Giver first came out. I think this was in 2008, and it was during the financial crisis at the time. And we got an email from a guy who was in the Pittsburgh area. He was a roofer. He repaired roofs, and at that time, he and all his competitors were finding their business just went downhill. Why? Because it's not that people didn't need their roofs repaired. It's that they didn't have, they were worried about the money, right? About not having the money. And then they couldn't wait to get, they didn't know how long it was going to take to get reimbursed by the home insurance company and this and that. And so what they were all doing, and this is, according to his email, was they were kind of all pulling back on the value they were giving, trying to give the least value, right? For the same amount of money. He read the Go-Giver and he went, wow, I'm doing this like totally backwards. I've got to focus on the value, right? And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to do that. And that's the thing. And what he did, I thought this was brilliant. He researched the insurance companies and he discovered how to help people get their money reimbursed the most they could, the quickest period of time, with the least hassle. So now he'd come across, or he'd see someone with a roof that needed repaired. And he never asked, "Would you like your roof repaired?" That wasn't the question. He knew they needed their roof repaired. It was, I can do that. Not only can I repair your roof, but I can help you get reimbursed quickly, to the highest degree, and with the least hassle. And I'll walk you right through it. And his business just took off.
It doesn't surprise me. We had another person on the podcast, Patrick Stewart, who's the CEO of Apricot Lane Boutiques. It's a boutique clothing store. And what's wild about Apricot Lane is during COVID, so many brick and mortar stores, and immediately after COVID, so many brick and mortar stores were dying. In fact, there were many headlines about, is this the end of the brick and mortar store? Where Apricot Lane, meanwhile, was exploding in growth. And I was asking him, like, so what's the secret? And he said, even though people's temptation was making as many sales as possible, like getting customers in and out, our approach was, how do I actually spend more time with that customer? How do I find ways to be more intentional with them? And it sort of created this amazing reputation about their brand. And it's the reason he points to for why the business grew during COVID while everyone else in his industry was really shrinking.
I love that. That's awesome. Good.
So, we are getting towards the end of our conversation today. Quick question as we're wrapping up. You're an author. I see the amazing books behind you. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, as of today, and you can't say a book that you've published, all-time favorite book.
So I hate to not just give you a direct answer, but it's
I had a feeling you might do this.
Yeah. but it sort of depends on, on what is looking to be accomplished through that. So, if you talk about, if it's a matter of people skills, well, I can't find it there, but it's, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Great book. Yeah.
If it's about understanding the way the mind works and how our belief system is what determines our success, then Psycho-Cybernetics, that was published in 1960, is a book that just totally helped me to an immense degree back when I first read it. If you're looking at understanding human nature and how human nature relates to sales, then a book called The Secret of Selling Anything by Harry Brown, which was actually written in the 1960s, but published in, I think, 2007 or something. But, this would be, to me, my favorite book. So, and then there's books such as Peace, Power, and Plenty, written back in, I think this was 1910, maybe 1909, I think, by Orison Swett Marden, the original founder of Success Magazine, which talks about, inner peace, personal power, and plenty or abundance. And every page just has gems of wisdom on it. So I can't really give you one book, but there's so many of them that have made such a difference in my life.
Well, for our listeners, if you're not watching the video, Bob has a massive bookcase behind him. And for each of those books, I mean, there's got to be hundreds of books behind him, or 100 books. For every book, he turned and went to exactly where the book was. So it's not for display. Like, it's clear, Bob, you've read all these. And then every book that Bob pulled out, he had a number of Post-it notes, annotations, notes on the book. You may not be a reader, guys, but if you want to be successful in business, you have to learn how to learn from other people. So we got a few great recommendations from Bob, but hey, you know what to do. You got to get a copy of The Go-Giver to totally elevate your business game. Bob, it was so special having you on the podcast today. I got so much from it. So did our listeners. Thank you for coming on today. Where would be the best place for people to buy the book?
If they go to burg.com and they go to the tab where it says books, they can get the first chapter and see if they like it first, and then click through to Amazon or wherever they would like. There'll also be a little pop-up that says they can subscribe to my daily impact email. And so there's a lot to check out if they would like, but basically burg.com is the place. burg.com is the place to go.
Right. Thank you again, Bob.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the link to burg.com in the episode description so you can get yourself a copy of The Go-Giver, as well as getting on that daily newsletter. And hey, if you're listening to the podcast and you're thinking, hey, am I subscribed to this thing? The answer needs to be yes. Click that subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice. Don't forget, if you're a business owner and you want your business advertised on the podcast, you can absolutely reach out at blake@goodadvicecoaching.com or check out our Patreon to support the podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the show today. And that's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.